Our final speaker is Asad Jafri. Asad is a cultural producer and interdisciplinary artist with a creative vision for sustainable social change. He works closely with emerging and established artists on new opportunities for original work, developmental workshops, artist retreats and residencies, cultural exchanges, network building, and resource sharing. He has served as a touring cultural ambassador for the U.S. Department of State, as well as an advisor for the New England Foundation for the Arts Center Stage and Art Midwest's Caravanserai programs to bring international performing artists on U.S. residency tours. An artist himself, Asad plays and blends soulful music from around the globe as DJ Manowax. He will speak on performance, ideas, and experience on stage. Asad?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Cecily, for connecting the different regions we were just in as well. And I'm proud to share the stage with giants such as Shahid Olbai and Salma Appa as well. I added the off the stage as well because I'm not really sure if I'm sticking to this topic, but I figured that that would give me the leeway to go as far off as I needed to. As mentioned, my name is Asad Ali Jafri. The company that I work through that I founded a couple of years ago is called Sakoon Creative. I'd also like to acknowledge that in the 12 years that I've been working in this realm, which I'll call Muslim culture with a capital C, I've been really privileged to work with people like Michael Orlov or Zeba Rahman that have served as inspirations, guides, mentors along the way. And I really think it's important to build those relationships and collaborations as we move this field forward. So as I said, 75% of my time or so over the last dozen years has been intentionally focused on what I'll call Muslim culture. And I'm intentionally using that word, not with a box or not with any hard lines, but very fluid. And like I said, it's intentional, and we'll get to why. A lot of the work I do is around performance, concerts, festivals, and such. This was at the Apollo Theater with Iman, an organization that I was the director of arts for and worked with in some way or another for at least a decade. There's also festivals that have taken me across the globe. The work has ranged from Northwest and East Africa to South Asia to Southeast Asia. But I also find myself doing most of my work in the US, Europe, and places where Muslim engagement is just as strong. This was a festival that we used to do, and it's still happening actually, called Taken to the Streets. That happens in Chicago, known as an urban international festival. And just a few kind of different ideas of what the work looks like on stage. There's also a number of exhibition and new works that happen, as well as artist development, both with established and emerging artists. There's new original work, yes, that is me DJing and coming up with either theatrical pieces or dance or otherwise. And the reason I'm showing you all this is to show you kind of the ecosystem in which not just me, but a group of people, a network of people, and I would say even an alliance of people is working on within this context of Muslim culture. Some of it is artist development. I just came back from Malaysia, or not came back, but came here from Malaysia. And one of the key things that we were doing was this fellowship program for emerging artists that kind of merged together professional and business development with their creative skill. There's also a lot of youth work that happens, whether it's in Morocco, refugees from the Rohingya community, or other folks. This is South Africa, Morocco, and Jamaica, I believe. Last but definitely not least is this idea of collaboration. This is a famous, almost I would say, pop Qawwali singer, Amjad Sabri, that we were asked to collaborate with, and a Sudanese singer from Brooklyn, Al Sara. And if you can imagine some kind of weird fusion between the two, that's what took place in Karachi. Again, the reason I'm saying all this is basically to kind of paint the picture of the world that I'm working in and to kind of make an argument and a case for it. It's one that's really based on Muslim identity, not as a religious piece, but as a cultural one that connects in different ways. A lot of that work is also cultural exchange, whether that happens with the State Department, independent or private foundations, or just through individuals. And one of the groups that I toured last year in the US was from Malaysia. As you all probably know, Malaysia is a very multi-ethnic, multi-faith community. They'd like to say maybe melting pot as well, but we all know that there's political issues that take place and different hierarchies. So this was the group. They're the Diplomats of Drum. In that picture, you probably see about 13 of them. Touring, there's about 18. So as you can imagine, 6 weeks on the road with these guys, I had my hands full. Interestingly enough, though, we went to Houston, we went to Gainesville, Florida, we went to Atlanta, bigger cities, college towns, but we also went to Crockett, Texas. Anybody been there? There's not a lot of people in Crockett, Texas. There's also not a lot of reason to perhaps go to Crockett, Texas. The interesting thing was on this residency, where they were going to be in each city for a week, Crockett had a lot of problems. And unbeknown to the group, because I wasn't allowed to tell them, there were a lot of letters to the editor of their local newspaper that were coming out. And a lot of the folks started by saying, we absolutely don't want this because this is a program called Caravanserai, exploring Muslim cultures from around the globe. And those escalated to becoming death threats about the group coming. And the reason was they looked at this picture and several others, and they said, no, we know what this is. These guys look like the guys from ISIS. And of course, some of you, probably most of you can tell, is the two guys in the middle with the turbans and perhaps the beards aren't even Muslim at all, right? They're Sikh. And it just goes to show kind of some of this conflation of this term Muslim, and the reason why some of us choose to embrace it so much. Muslim, before even 9/11, way before that, has been racialized quite a bit, right? And has become this boogeyman and this other. And so kind of like Shahidul Bhai was referencing to, when it comes to these issues of politics, Islamophobia, et cetera, if we keep talking about this, but nobody wants to take ownership of the term, then who's left to kind of work with, right? And I know there's an issue with the titles and such, but I think we can leave those behind for the bigger problems that we're all trying to address and solve. So of course, they have the performance, it's great, lots of people come out, everybody loves them, all these things are demystified, they cook for everyone Malaysian food, and who doesn't love Malaysian food, right? And there's people on stage dancing and all of that. And I can say that this is great, right? I can say that they went to this town and people's minds were changed, but this isn't enough, right? This is the kind of easy thing that funders love to see numbers and say that we made a difference because this group came. But the type of work that I'm trying to do is something that needs to be long-term and needs to be sustainable. We talked about the urgency of now, right? There's been an urgency of now for a while, I would say at least since September 11th, but before that as well. And the issue is that we like to do these things that look great, right? And that seem to be great and are these kind of cultural exchanges and relationships that are temporary, but we're not really addressing the core issues and we're not creating something that's sustainable and long-term. So as much as I get involved in this work, I also think about, well, what's happening to the real relationship building and what kind of institutions are we building and who are we representing or who are we doing this for? Another important part of that for me, I came to the US in 1990 because of the first Gulf War. And the first thing that I was attracted to and I thought of as Muslim culture, beyond what my parents from South Asia were, feeding us as that, was these guys. And beyond this too. I'm not sure why that says all that stuff in the background, but you can ignore it. And it's this strong legacy of Muslim culture that exists within the US that we barely talk about. And we can't continue to talk about this thing about Muslims here and the West here, or even the diaspora, because it's not the true story. And we can't just pick and choose. If we're going to talk about Muslims, let's talk about Muslims. Let's talk about blues music. Let's talk about jazz. Let's talk about hip hop. And let's talk about a lot of the folks that are still alive that have contributed to a rich culture right in the US. So this, and hip hop culture for me specifically, was just as important as this. And the merging of the two and the creating and the connections of something like Sufi music or Qawwali music that's done at shrines was immediately connected to what I was seeing working on the south side of Chicago, for example, with young people. So I guess the question becomes why Muslim culture, and hopefully I've started making a case for it. I would argue that between this network or alliance of people, there is this shared identity. It may be based on shared values, but there's a shared identity that goes beyond religion. There's also this need for space, whether that's physical or virtual. There's this need for people to come together and be able to claim that space. There's this need for agency, and there's this need for self-identification as something. When we talk about all the different schools of thought and sects and whether somebody's practicing or not, and all of these kinds of things, the space that an artist that happens to identify as Muslim amongst a number of other identities that they have, it becomes a really small and anorexic space, which is very difficult to operate in. That allows for a lack of resources because they're operating in this space that is not very clearly defined. there's not a lot of Muslim leadership in the cultural realm. And the reason is because Muslims then end up being delegated to just either religious leadership or leadership that is seen as okay by the systems of governments in which they exist. So in Muslim majority countries, it's one way. But in the West, to be the good Muslim, you have to denounce X, Y, and Z. The last thing is, this work isn't about absolutes. This work is about creating more questions. And if I can do that, or the people that I work with can do that, then we're challenging all of those narratives to tell you that there isn't just one narrative, right? And if art is the kind of transformation or communication of the human experience, then that's what we're trying to do, challenge all of those things that we've been told. And that brings me to the challenges themselves. There's this idea of this monolithic Muslim culture, right? And we use the capital C on purpose, but of course it's made up of all these different cultures that have historical significance. But oftentimes they get put with this Islamic title that I just despise when it comes to the arts and culture. No offense to anyone. But the idea is that then it all becomes this museumified historic thing, or that all Muslims are the same, or Islam is about this. The other part of it is this dichotomy. Whether you're in Pakistan or whether you're in the US, the dichotomy changes, but you have to either be part of us or them. You have to be part of this black and white notion of the good Muslim, the bad Muslim, and whatever that means in between. There's also a lack of Muslim-led initiatives. When Zeba said that that small little Building Bridges fund is the only thing really, the only game in town in the US, that's really sad. And the issue is that we're not supporting Muslim-led initiatives. And it would be deplorable to think about this with any other racial or ethnic group, but for some reason it's okay to other the Muslim community. The last thing is government initiatives, right? As good as the State Department has been, to me personally, and to a lot of initiatives in sending artists across and abroad and exchanges, they're also a big part of the problem, right? They're often causing the issues that we then have to kind of resolve as artists or creative workers or cultural producers. The last thing is that there's a lot of insular communities, and this happens in power dynamics, and if you understand community organizing, is that communities are becoming smaller, and also as Zeba mentioned, and some of you may know, that intra-community work is just as important. The reason being because we've learned that community support is integral. For all the kind of US or Western-based initiatives that I've been a part of, there's no community support from Muslim communities for some of these initiatives. So you're trying to represent a group of people and say that we need to have this exchange, but you haven't gone into those communities and asked them what they need or how they need to be represented. You just kind of assumed it as a presenter. Number two is content area experts. The reason I say this is we have a ton of content area experts when it comes to curation and other things, but there's a few examples. I'll give you two of them. I was part of an advisory group that was state and private funded. And we were talking about different countries. And of course, state had a list of Muslim majority nations without saying it. And two of them were Senegal and Mali. And I might have shared this 2 years ago as well. And one of the experts in the room said, well, I don't know why all these Muslim countries are on this State Department list, except for Senegal and Mali, which are not. And if you guys know your demographics, of course, Senegal and Mali are both 99% Muslim majority countries. But the idea that people don't even know what we're talking about when we reference this and always think either Middle East, Arab, or maybe on to Pakistan and Afghanistan is a real problem. But these are the same people that are making decisions, funding decisions, policy decisions. Long-term and sustainable goals just references what I was talking about earlier. We're great at doing cultural exchanges. We're great at doing festivals. We're great at doing performances. And that's kind of where my bread and butter is personally too. But we're not creating institutions and we're not kind of giving the resources where they need to be so that a generation from now, maybe a few generations from now, we see the change happen. I think it's this kind of American or Western context that we want to see the change now, and we're not looking kind of to the original Americans who are looking 7 generations down, right? The last couple of things that are important, and we talked about community building a lot, is this idea of creating spaces and intentional spaces, such as this one, but such as the face-to-face relationship building and allowing artists, creatives, cultural producers to collaborate, to ideate, and to come up with the solutions themselves as well. And for that to be the goal within itself, not to have this kind of, we need these metrics and outcomes all the time, although they're really important. Sometimes you just need those people in a room, and that should be the intention. And then the last and most important thing is the real relationship building that we're creating, and that happening outside of just the funder institution level. One of the things that I've been working on that that is basically a response to this is the foundation for Muslim culture and is the idea that we don't have institutions like this. So this same network and alliance of people have come together and said, you know what, we're just going to build it because nobody else is doing that work. And the idea here is to have a few different outcomes, including these kinds of gatherings that I just mentioned. But the first and most important thing is to do a cultural mapping that focuses on cities where we believe Muslim cultural production is happening on a high level, and think about what those data sets are, think about a way to share those resources in an open source way, and marry this cultural mapping with technology so people have it on their phone as an app, whether you're a cultural producer, a consumer, an artist, and you can connect those resources. And we also decentralize leadership in some of these communities so that it's open source. So it's some of the work that's exciting me right now and some of the work that I'm going around the globe kind of trying to do. And I feel this kind of gathering is really important part of it. But I guess I just wanted to give a different perspective from the inside across this community and network of people. Oh, but more importantly, perhaps, there are a few more slides. I want to close this with kind of an experience I had in Malaysia recently. I collaborated with this artist. I don't know if some of you here know her. She's Italian. Her name is Maimuna Goresi, probably mispronouncing the last name. But she's based in Verona, and she's an Italian-born artist in her 60s. But she had this really interesting experience in Senegal with one of the Sufi Murid communities out there, in which she kind of changed her spiritual path and came up with some really compelling work that I really, really enjoy and like. And you may have seen this. So she's a photographer, an artist, a filmmaker. And the reason that I share this is we were talking about cultural capital and identity. And she was basically like, you know, that's my story as an Italian that's kind of working in this way. And her fluidity of what Muslim and spirituality means within her work. But the reason I brought it up, especially with some of these, is we were walking around yesterday talking about this Italian fascination with the Black Moors, right? And I just thought, when people said, well, people are still interested in that, which I'm sure is true, but I see Maimuna's journey and story as kind of a new interpretation of that. She is in the exhibition. Oh, great, wonderful. So yeah, I thought that would be a good, you can ignore that word, beats in life. I thought that would be a great way to end as with a local artist. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad.